From 1778 to 1871, the United States made 368 agreements with various indigenous groups across North America. These agreements, spanning nearly a century from the Revolutionary War to the aftermath of the Civil War, set the foundation for the long-term relationship between the United States and the Native American nation. The agreements were based on the idea that each tribal group was an independent nation with the right to govern itself. However, as white settlers started moving onto Native American lands, this concept clashed with the rapid westward expansion, leading to numerous broken treaties and unfulfilled promises by the U.S. government. In today's episode of the Natives Journals, we take a closer look at the detailed history of these treaties and their lasting impact on indigenous communities across North America. Join us as we explore the challenges, struggles, and resilience of Native American nations in the face of broken promises and the changing landscape of their ancestral lands. Please support us by liking this video and subscribing to our channel. Before and during the American Revolution, the 13 colonies that later became the United States were surrounded by British forts and various indigenous tribes. Some of these tribes supported the British Crown due to trade and other reasons, while some tribes remained neutral. Others chose to side with the American revolutionaries. Both the British and the Americans sought native allies during the conflict. For instance, the Oneida and Tuscarora tribes of the Iroquois League, as well as the Stockbridge Indians from Massachusetts, supported Washington's army. These actions caused divisions within tribal confederacies, such as the Iroquois and Cherokee, and set the stage for later treaty negotiations between the U.S. government and Native American tribes. Over the centuries, the U.S. government has negotiated and signed numerous treaties with Native American tribes. Between 1770 and 1870, approximately 370 treaties were approved and signed, with the exception of the 18 treaties related to California in 1851 to 1852. These treaties addressed complex issues and were often used as a means to acquire tribal land, whether through force or other methods. The federal government primarily used treaties as the legal tool to transfer ownership of these lands, sometimes disguising them and making it seem like they were about peace and friendship agreements. An example of this is the Doty Treaty of Ruby Valley in 1863, which was among the Western Shawnee tribes of Nevada, and effectively resulted in the seizure of Indian lands. However, many of these treaties also included guarantees of peace, protection of fishing and hunting rights, clear boundaries for tribal land, and safeguards for indigenous people against both foreign and domestic threats. Despite being approved by the U.S. Senate and signed into law by the President, a significant number of these treaties were either poorly enforced or not implemented at all. Over time, they became less known administratively, seemingly forgotten, as was the case with the 18 treaties of California in 1852. The treatment of Native American tribes in California serves as an example relevant to the entire nation. These 18 separate treaties were made with 122 California Native American tribes. However, for these treaties to become legally binding, they needed approval from Congress and the President's signature. Unfortunately, Congress chose not to approve them, mainly due to objections raised by newly elected California senators. Moreover, these treaties remained hidden until their rediscovery in 1905 by a Senate clerk and Charles E. Kelsey of San Jose, who was later appointed as a special Indian agent for California's landless and homeless indigenous population. The California tribes entered into these treaties in good faith, believing and hoping that these documents would end their persecution and displacement from their homelands, while also securing certain rights for Native Americans. The government treaty commissioners aimed to allocate land to the tribes, which amounted to approximately 8.5 million acres. Spread across the 18 treaty districts out of the roughly 100 million acres that make up California. As conflict continued between the American forces and California tribes after the American takeover, and with the tribes' populations declining significantly, the tribes came to realize that a compromise was necessary. Reluctantly, they agreed to sign these treaties. Consequently, the treaties were signed, although not all tribes agreed to them. Nevertheless, these tribal communities devised strategies for survival as their traditional ways of life, and families were greatly affected. Regrettably, in the course of history, many of the 371 treaties that received approval were either left in a state of uncertainty or saw their land rights and federal tribal recognition diminished over time. Consequently, in many cases, little to nothing has changed. This California case is just one among numerous instances of such treaties that have been mishandled or forgotten in history. It serves as a reminder of the challenges faced by Native American tribes in their interactions with the U.S. government. These treaties, often made under duress or with unclear outcomes, highlight the complications and often unjust interactions that have characterized indigenous communities' relationship with the government. Let's now explore some other noteworthy treaties that have played significant roles in history, but were eventually broken by the U.S. government. Top of our list is the Treaty with the Delawares, Treaty of Fort Pitt, 1778. The Treaty with the Delawares, also known as the Treaty of Fort Pitt, was a significant event in September 1778, when representatives from the newly formed Continental Congress came together to sign a peace agreement with the Lenape, commonly referred to as the Delaware tribe, at Fort Pitt, Pennsylvania. This marked the inaugural official peace treaty between the emerging United States and the Native American nation. The accord's primary aim was to establish a lasting friendship and pledge mutual support in the face of British aggression. Despite the promising outset, lingering suspicions persisted between the parties. This mistrust reached a tragic turning point on March 1782, when Pennsylvania militiamen tragically and erroneously targeted a Lenape village in Canandaigua. This brutal incident resulted in nearly 100 Lenape deaths, including many women and children. The militia wrongly thought that the Lenape were behind attacks on white settlers, making tensions worse. As time passed, the American victory in the Revolutionary War encouraged an influx of white settlers into Lenape territory. This encroachment on their lands continued until the signing of the Treaty of Greenville in 1795. This treaty coerced the Lenape and other Native American communities in the Ohio country to relinquish most of their ancestral lands, marking a tragic breach of the treaty with the Delawares. This event highlights the complex history of treaties and land agreements during this era, characterized by cooperation and betrayal, ultimately impacting the Native American nations and their lands. Treaty of Hopewell, 1785 to 1786. The Treaty of Hopewell, negotiated between 1785 and 1786, marked a pivotal moment in the years following the American Revolutionary War. It was orchestrated by Andrew Pickens and fellow commissioners representing the newly formed U.S. government. These treaties, strikingly similar in content, were executed with the Cherokee, Choctaw, and Chickasaw nations. The backdrop for these negotiations was Andrew Pickens' plantation home located in northwestern South Carolina, aptly named Hopewell, collectively referred to as the Treaty of Hopewell. These agreements aimed to extend the goodwill and protection of the United States to the Native American tribes residing in the southern regions. These three treaties concluded with a recurring commitment the hatchet shall be forever buried, and peace given by the United States of America. However, even though these agreements expressed noble ideas, the reality on the ground was quite different. White settlers were already encroaching upon the lands designated for the Cherokee, inevitably leading to heightened tensions and conflict. This mounting pressure led to the Treaty of Holston in 1791, which witnessed the Cherokee ceding even more of their ancestral lands. The Treaty of Hopewell, while initially aiming for peace and cooperation, ultimately fell short of its promises. Despite its noble intentions, this treaty was eventually broken due to a combination of factors. The primary reason was the relentless westward expansion of white settlers onto lands designated for the Cherokee and other Native American nations. These settlers, often encouraged by government policies and individual greed, disregarded the treaty's provisions and encroached upon indigenous territory. This encroachment inevitably escalated conflicts between the Native American tribes and the incoming settlers. As tensions flared, sporadic violence erupted, further straining the fragile peace established by the U.S. government. Rather than protecting the rights and lands of the Cherokee, Choctaw, and Chickasaw nations, as promised in the Treaty of Hopewell, often sided with the settlers or could not enforce the treaty's terms effectively. The treaty's admirable goals of lasting peace and cooperation ultimately crumbled in the face of unchecked westward expansion and the failure of the U.S. government to uphold its commitments to the indigenous people. Treaty of Canandaigua, 1794. In 1794, President George Washington sought to improve relations between his government and the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, a coalition of 6 Iroquois-speaking tribes known as Mohawk, Cayuga, Onondaga, Oneida, Seneca, and Tuscarora nations. To accomplish this, he dispatched his general, Timothy Pickering, to negotiate a treaty in Canandaigua, New York. This historic treaty had several significant provisions. First, it restored over 1 million acres of land to the Seneca, which had been previously relinquished in a treaty a decade earlier. Additionally, the treaty acknowledged the sovereignty of the 6 nations, granting them the authority to self-govern and establish their own laws. Moreover, the United States pledged to provide an annual payment of $4,500 worth of goods, including calico cloth, to the Haudenosaunee. As time passed, the 6 nations saw a gradual reduction in their territory. Some tribes, such as the Onondaga, Seneca, Tuscarora, and a portion of the Oneida, remained in New York, living on reservations. However, the Mohawk and Cayuga tribes relocated to Canada, and the remaining Oneida settled in areas like Wisconsin and Ontario. Unfortunately, as history unfolded, the promises made in the Treaty of Canandaigua were not upheld. The Haudenosaunee faced further land loss, infringements on their sovereignty, and challenges to their way of life. This treaty, which once held hope for improved relations, ultimately became a symbol of broken promises and continued struggles for the 6 nations. Treaty of Greenville, 1795. The Treaty of Greenville emerged as a pivotal moment in American history in 1795. At that time, the westward expansion of white settlers into the Great Lake region had already set the stage for conflict with various Native American tribes. This confederacy included the Shawnee and Delaware, who had been pushed further west by the relentless U.S. expansion. Additionally, the Miami, Ottawa, Ojibwa, and Potawatomi were part of this Native American alliance, and they had initiated armed resistance in the late 1780s. The turning point came when U.S. forces, led by General Mad, Anthony— achieved victory over these Native American tribes in the Battle of Fallen Timber. As a result of this military defeat, Miami, Chief Little Turtle, and other native leaders were compelled to cede substantial portions of land that would eventually encompass Ohio, Michigan, Indiana, Illinois, and Wisconsin in the Greenville Treaty. However, the Greenville Treaty offered a brief break as the relentless westward expansion of the United States swiftly diminished its influence. By 1808, Shawnee War Chief Tecumseh had united various native tribes into a confederacy with the goal of mounting armed resistance against the ongoing seizure of Native American lands by the United States. The Treaty of Greenville serves as a stark example of the broader historical pattern of Native American dispossession and broken agreements. The promises made in the treaty were ultimately undermined by the ever-expanding American frontier, leading to further conflicts and displacement of native peoples in the years to come. The Treaty of Fort Wayne, 1809. The Treaty of Fort Wayne, negotiated by William Henry Harrison, the governor of Indiana Territory, involved discussions with native tribes, including the Delaware, Potawatomi, Miami, and Eel River tribe. Through this agreement, the United States obtained approximately 2.5 million acres of land spanning modern-day Michigan, Indiana, Illinois, and Ohio. Astonishingly, this vast expanse of land came at a cost of merely 2 cents per acre. However, controversy soon erupted as Tecumseh and other leaders contended that the individuals who signed the treaty lacked the authority to sell the land. They strongly cautioned Americans against settling in these newly acquired territories. In 1811, tensions escalated when Harrison led an assault on a Native American camp situated along the Tippecanoe River. This act marked the inception of a fresh conflict between the United States and Native American tribes, which would persist throughout the War of 1812. Tragically, Tecumseh, a prominent figure in the resistance against American expansion, met his demise in battle in 1813. This event also marked the dissolution of his confederacy, dashing his vision of Native American independence. Ultimately, the Treaty of Fort Wayne was broken due to the dispute over its legitimacy. Tecumseh and his supporters vehemently asserted that the signatories had no right to transfer the land to the United States. Their resistance resulted in armed conflict, leading to the outbreak of hostilities that endured beyond Tecumseh's death. As a result, the treaty's terms were not upheld, and the land acquisitions by the United States in the treaty faced ongoing resistance and challenges from Native American tribes, leading to a protracted and complex historical period in the early 19th century. Andrew Jackson and the Indian Removal Act, 1830, during the period spanning 1814 to 1824, Andrew Jackson served as a federal commissioner and engaged in negotiations with Native American tribes in the Southeast. These negotiations resulted in the signing of 9 out of 11 treaties with tribes such as the Choctaws, Chickasaws, Creeks, Seminoles, and Cherokees. These treaties led to the relinquishment of approximately 50 million acres of land situated in Alabama, Florida, Georgia, Tennessee, Mississippi, Kentucky, and North Carolina by these tribes. In 1828, Andrew Jackson was elected as the President of the United States, and during his presidency, he played a pivotal role in advancing the Indian Removal Act of 1830 through Congress. This act authorized the U.S. government to allocate land west of the Mississippi River to Native American tribes in exchange for their agreement to abandon their ancestral lands. In theory, the removal process was meant to be voluntary, but in practice, Jackson employed various coercive tactics. These tactics included threats of withholding payments promised under the treaties and the deployment of legal and military measures. Consequently, Nearly 70 removal treaties were concluded during Jackson's presidency. These treaties resulted in the opening up of approximately 25 million acres of land in the southern United States to white settlement, and, notably, the expansion of slavery into these territories. The eventual breaking of the treaty stemmed from the discrepancy between the promised voluntary nature of the removal process and the reality of forceful measures used to compel Native American tribes to comply. Jackson's administration effectively coerced numerous tribes into relinquishing their ancestral lands, ultimately leading to the forced removal and relocation of indigenous peoples. Treaty of New Echota, 1835. This treaty was signed with a faction of the Cherokee Nation, but it did not represent the majority of Cherokees. The treaty ceded all Cherokee land in the United States in exchange for land in Indian Territory, present-day Oklahoma, and other compensation. However, the majority of Cherokees, led by Principal Chief John Ross, strongly opposed this treaty. The U.S. government, under President Andrew Jackson, proceeded to approve the treaty despite the opposition of the Cherokee Nation's legitimate leadership. The Treaty of New Echota enforcement resulted in the forced removal of the Cherokee people from their ancestral lands, a tragic event known as the Trail of Tears. Thousands of Cherokees suffered and died during the forced march to Indian Territory. This treaty is a stark example of how the U.S. government broke its promises and disregarded the rights and sovereignty of Native American tribes, leading to significant hardship and loss for the Cherokee Nation. Fort Laramie Treaty, 1868. The Fort Laramie Treaty of 1868, signed at Fort Laramie and other military outposts in present-day Wyoming, is a pivotal document in American history. This treaty marked the U.S. government's acknowledgement of the Black Hills of Dakota as the Great Sioux Reservation, exclusively designated for the Sioux, comprising the Dakota, Lakota, and Nakota tribes, and the Echota tribes, and the Arapaho people. However, this solemn agreement was eventually broken due to the discovery of gold in the Black Hills. Prospectors and settlers flooded the region, disregarding the treaty's provisions and the rights of the indigenous inhabitants. This influx led to a grave breach of the treaty. Native resistance against this violation reached its zenith in the notorious Battle of the Little Bighorn in 1876. Following this conflict, the government dispatched troops to the area in an attempt to assert control. By this time, in 1871, Congress had decided to cease the long-standing practice of entering into treaties with individual Native American tribes. The legislation of 1871 declared that no Indian nation or tribe would be recognized as an independent entity with which the United States could negotiate through treaties. This policy shift further undermined the integrity of the Fort Laramie Treaty. More than a century later, the Supreme Court passed a significant ruling in 1980, affirming that the U.S. had illegally confiscated the Black Hills. The court awarded the Sioux over $100 in reparations. Nevertheless, Sioux leaders vehemently rejected this monetary compensation, asserting that their sacred land was never for sale, and the controversy surrounding the sacred land persists to this day, as it does with numerous other broken treaties that have marred the relationship between Native American tribes and the U.S. government. There's a lot of talk about the need to right the wrongs done to American Indian tribes, but the progress has been disappointingly slow. Many excuses are being used to justify why it's challenging to correct errors made by the Bureau of Indian Affairs, or BIA, or why it's taking so much time. However, a crucial question remains unanswered. These treaties were negotiated and approved by government representatives and ratified by the U.S. Senate. If we disregard the value of these agreements, what does it say about other domestic and international treaties that form the foundation of U.S. law today? Ultimately, It seems that Native American treaties are still at risk of being influenced by shifting political dynamics as different administrations come into power and new Supreme Court justices, who may not support Native American rights, are appointed for life. This vulnerability jeopardizes the rights of America's indigenous people. It's a concerning reality that requires sustained attention and action. We hope that today's series serves as a reminder of the ongoing struggle for justice and the importance of upholding the rights of Native American communities. To stay informed about these critical issues and not miss out on our new episodes, please subscribe to our channel and click the notification bell. Together, we can work towards a more equitable future.